In this video, I'm gonna walk you through the shooting and editing process so you can see how we went from this handheld shot that I took during the walkthrough to this edited image. In fact, as a bonus, I'm going to edit two different versions. One where I used nothing but natural window light, and the other where I used flash. Now, if you completely missed the walkthrough video, I recently traveled out west to visit this beautiful vacation rental property in Bailey, Colorado, known as the Zen Treehouse. And during the walkthrough video, when it came to this shot of the bedroom, I thought I had the composition figured out. But when it came time to actually set up the tripod and get to shooting, it did not go exactly as planned. I'm kind of now, as I was setting up the tripod, I'm going against even what I had initially talked about in that video. Initially, I thought I was going to use a 24mm tilt shift and try to get the camera as close to the door as possible. The issue with that though, or I'll even do a quick shot with this. We'll put this lens at 24mm and put it relatively close to where I thought it was gonna be. So if you notice in that shot, the bedroom post on the far side, the one furthest away from the camera, it's running through the left side of it enough that it bothers me. I want some of that tile work to show up between that post and that fireplace, just to add some separation. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go back to 14mm just so I can get a reference of the whole space. Clearly, I'm not gonna be shooting this at 14. If anything, I think I'm gonna be shooting this probably closer to maybe 30 or 35, which ideally I like. That gives it a more compressed, professional looking image, and that's just my opinion. That kind of goes closer to my style. But that being said, as I'm thinking out loud now, I wanna make sure not to go too tight because I don't wanna miss the beam. So we'll figure that out. This one's being a pain in the butt. So for this one, I love the compression we're introducing into this frame, but we are missing way too much of the sliding glass doors now. We're missing one of the biggest features of this room, and I'm not a fan. So here's what I'm thinking we're gonna do. I'm gonna throw on the 24mm tilt shift to the left to make sure that we get plenty of that in there. So let me throw on the 24mm tilt shift and see how that looks. This is really how it goes. When you're on a job, you're like, okay, that didn't work. Okay, let's try this. That doesn't work. We're gonna try this now. And I think that's it. I think that's the composition I'm happy with. Let's get to kind of finalizing, making sure everything's straight, and then we'll get into the actual like different types of exposures. And I'm debating whether or not I'm gonna use flash. I might throw it in here just to kind of showcase what it might do or doesn't do to the scene. So we'll, yeah, let's play with it a bit.
I want to talk to you today about something that is affecting all of us. Packs of stray dogs roaming the city streets.
I'm gonna set up my 7-foot Westcott umbrella. I'm gonna put my Godox 8600 on it. And what I'm gonna do is try to shoot where maybe the ambient light inside this room is maybe about a stop underexposed, and then bring it back up using the flashlight. And the reason I'm gonna do that is just to see what the light quality looks like. It might look a little different. And plus, if you like using flash, it's light that's a little bit more under your control. So let's, I'll bring that stuff out and we'll see what it looks like. So I got the Westcott light set up out there. I've got it set at half power, which for the 8600 Pro is pretty powerful. So let's go to the Cam Ranger, and since we're using flash now, we've got a couple settings we need to adjust on the camera. So I'm not gonna keep the ISO at 100. If I keep it that low, so it's okay, but it's still quite dark. So the only thing that I'm gonna do is bump up the ISO to 400, and we're back to kind of the overall brightness that I would like. We're still getting a little blooming around the windows. And since we're introducing flash, I might as well control the shutter speed to take down the ambient light and in essence to bring down that blooming. Let's take it down to 1/40 and fire that off. Let's see what that looks like. I kind of like where we're heading with this. We're taming the blooming around the windows. It doesn't look overdone. Yeah, those look like they're being controlled, and it still looks like we're getting a good chunk of natural light. I might actually end up going the flash route on this now that I'm seeing it like this. Let's position the light in some different ways along the balcony and see how that changes the scene. So we started there. I'm gonna move it 2 or 3 feet over to the right. We'll fire that off. I'm digging it. Let's scoot over about another 2 feet and fire that off. I thought I was gonna go all natural on this one, but I'm taking that back. That's it for the shot. I think we're gonna throw it back over to the editor, Matthew, who's behind the computer. So let's start with the just completely natural light exposure. Let's do this edit real quick. If you want to get to the part of the video where I edit the flash layers, feel free to jump to this time code, but keep in mind some of the things that are going to affect those layers I'm probably going to take care of right now, so maybe you don't need to jump ahead. So again, I thought this was the route I was originally going to take, but then as the shoot went along, I got torn because I started to like how the flash layers turned out. But let's pretend I was just going to go 100% all natural light on this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tame the highlights a little bit. I don't think we're getting a ton of contrast or too much of a difference, so I'm going to take this down, let's say negative let's take the highlights down to negative 40, and I'll just bump up the shadows about the same, plus 40. In light of that, I'm going to change the clarity to about 25, and I think I'm going to change the contrast to about 20 on there as well, so that makes it a little bit more punchy. The overall exposure, I'm going to bump this up a bit. I'm going to hold down Alt to make sure that we're not clipping too much of the window view. Now, I mentioned this during the shoot, but I took it out of the video because I didn't want to bore you guys too much. But as you can probably tell, you can see some of the detail out the window, but I'm not going to do an insanely excessive window pull. In fact, I don't think I'm going to do a window pull at all. When it came to this shot, really the only thing you can see out the windows is just a few pine trees. That's about it. Now, as you saw in the walkthrough video, the house itself has an amazing view, but it just doesn't show up that well in this specific shot. So I'm going to kind of forego the view and just give a subtle hint as to what is on the other side of the glass, which in this case is the trees. Let's talk about white balance. Now, the walls themselves were kind of a grayish beige, so I can't rely on the walls too much. There were a lot of other things that were white. In some instances, I would have had a gray card, and I did have a gray card on me, but I neglected to use it. But I know for a fact that the trim around the windows was white. So as of right now, the color temperature is, let's just round up to 5400 with a tint of plus 16. But if we tap on this white trim, that warms it up to 5700 with a tint of plus 17. Now, people do send me messages. They ask quite a bit as far as, you know, how do you make sure to get the white balance correct? My default answer, if you're aside from using a gray card, is just trust your eyes. You were the one that was there. You should have a fairly good memory of what the white balance is. Now, although I tapped on it and that's what it's telling me is the color temperature, in my opinion, it's slightly too warm. The tint seems fine. In fact, well, no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud. I think I'm gonna leave the tint there, but I'm gonna cool down the color temperature here a bit. I'm gonna take it down to 5500. The next thing I wanna take care of is just the actual, the verticals and the alignment. I wanna double check those. Now here, well, let's do the verticals first. So this is pretty consistent right here. Let's go to the edge of this piece of the door all the way to down here. And the other thing I'm going to use is the tile work. I've said it before in other videos. Usually trim, cabinetry, and tile work, in my opinion, are some of the most consistent things as far as good reference points for making things straight and vertical. But as I'm doing this, I'm already noticing an issue. The biggest thing that lets the eye know if it's straight or not does not look straight, and I think it's this bedpost. I'm actually going to do something a little unorthodox. I'm going to use this as a reference point. Now, I know realistically this bedpost is probably not as level, but see, we're running into an issue. I'm going to go back to the bedpost, use it as the reference point, but then try get somewhere in between. And then we'll fine tune the corrections in Photoshop to make sure everything looks perfectly straight. So let's go about there. And that looks pretty decent. And now, since this is a 1-point perspective, not only do we have to worry about the verticals, we also have to be concerned and take a look at the horizontal lines. Let's use these windows as the reference point. Those are, again, the trim and the windows are pretty reliable reference point. Let's go there. And let's use the top of this bed frame as another reference point, because again, I think, although it may not be perfectly level, that is kind of what's telling the eye what is and isn't. So I think that's pretty decent. Again, not perfect, but we're pretty close. And last thing I want to check is the white and black levels. I'm going to bump up the whites again because I'm not too concerned with the view outside the window. I'm going to bump those up till those are just on the edge of clipping. And then the black layers, I'm gonna bring these down to about, let's say -25. Adds just a little bit more of subtle punch to the image. I think overall that looks pretty good. I'm looking at the histogram. We're fairly even. Nothing looks too clipped or lost in shadows. So yeah, I'm just gonna take this one image and send it over into Photoshop. Let's use the rulers in Photoshop as a reference to see how far off we are on these straight lines. The fireplace looks pretty decent. I mean, it might be a ½ a degree off, but because it's the furthest thing away from the camera, I don't think it's going to be as distracting as this, which is the bed frame. So I'm really thinking out loud. I've not edited this image yet, so you're along for the ride here. Let's take this image. We'll go to Edit, Transform, Skew. And I'm gonna drag this over just a hair. About like that. I mean, it is so subtle, but as you notice now, this bedpost is aligned up a lot better. Because the whole image itself looks a little different, let's try to subtly blend this in. How are we gonna do this? We'll cover it up with a mask and then start to brush this back in. The inside line of that bedpost might be still slightly off, but at this point I'm not going to worry about it too much. So let's merge all this to a layer. Go to merge visible, put it in its own layer, so that way I do this because I feel like I'm starting off with a fresh canvas, so to speak, when I have it as a brand new layer. I've had a few people ask me why I do that. No specific reason, not a huge benefit. It's just the way I work. Because I know I preferred the Flash version better, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one. For the most part, this is about it. What I'll do on the Flash version, I'll probably take out these things like this little note here on the fireplace, this outlet, things like that. So yeah, for the most part, that's about it. What I'll do, the final touch I'll do on here is just make sure we don't have any of these colors that I don't necessarily want in there. Before even looking, I'm guessing there's probably some magentas in here that I don't want. Yep, actually quite a bit. So I'm gonna take these down. Let's go to blues. Let's see how much blues we got. Wow, we got a decent amount in there too. Again, I know for a fact there were no actual blues in this bedding. Cyans, we'll see how much is there. There's some in there. Looks like some is being reflected off of the trees onto that floor. Let's go back and see where those are appearing. And then greens. I would guess we've got some, yeah, some greens in there as well. So let's take down all these colors and then we're gonna put them back in to where they should be. Like clearly I sucked all the greens out of the paintings and these plants, so we'll paint that back in. So I'm gonna add my own curves layer and kind of customize this. So I'm gonna keep the highlights where they are. I'm just gonna place that on the line, but I will boost the midtones, make this a little bit brighter image, but then darken some of those shadows to, again, add that punchiness to it. And then I'm gonna raise the black point to, let's say, about 6. Yeah, and I like it. So if I was going 100% natural light, that's what I would do. Still some other things I'd probably fine tune. So full disclosure, I already recorded the video portion where I go over the edits using the flash exposures, but my audio recorder died about 1/3 of the way through and I did not know that until the very, very end. So we're gonna go over it, but this one's gonna be a little bit more expedited, but don't worry, I'll still walk you through all the layers and the tweaks and adjustments and all that stuff. So we'll start going back into Lightroom, and essentially all I'm doing is just editing and fine-tuning the individual flash exposures. And for this one, I figured out that the white balance was 5600 and with plus 18. And I used the window trim as my point of reference. In my eyes and in my opinion, it still might have looked a little bit too green, but I kind of dealt with that. I'm not sure if it's just because I'm staring at the computer for too long or what. Bumped up the exposure overall. Made my adjustments as far as highlights and shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, texture, all that. There's no solid rule to all of this. This is all just to taste. So when it comes to highlights and shadows, which in my opinion is one of the biggest adjustments you can make to it, just go mostly based on how the scene looks. If there's a Lot of contrast in the scene already. You might have to do some heavy-handed adjustments. Regardless, there wasn't a lot of contrast I wanted to get rid of in this scene. So again, this might just be a subtle adjustment where I took the highlights down -30, shadows up 30. And then I just did a copy and paste of the adjustments as far as verticals and horizontals from the natural frame over to this one because the camera never moved. I took the settings from this frame and then did a copy and paste to the rest of them over here, where the only difference is I just simply moved the flash along the balcony, just kind of creating different subtle changes to the light. And essentially what I'm doing, so let's go over into Photoshop and I'll show you here, is I take all these layers, stack them on top of each other, and then just change the blend mode to lighten on each one of these. You'll see this little mask over here, and you'll see kind of a black part, and that black part is me just kind of painting out any chance of me actually peering through the glass. That's about it. But as you'll notice in this layer here, that blend mode is changed to lighten, this one is changed to lighten, and this one is changed to lighten. And I combine those all into a layer, and essentially what we're doing is mimicking a shot as if there were 4 of these gigantic, these 7-foot Westcott umbrellas being fired off at the same time instead of just one. Now, was all that work worth it? Well, you be the judge. This is with them blended together, and this is just a single shot. Together, single shot, but still a little bit of a difference. The next step in this layer was to do something very similar that I did in the natural light layer, which is to extract the colors that I didn't want to be there. There wasn't as many magentas, there wasn't as many blues and greens in this one, so I think for the most part I actually nailed the white balance on this one more precisely than I did the natural light one, and maybe the flashlight helped clean that up too. But then I made sure to paint them back into where they should be, that being, you'll see here through the mask, the little plant, the paintings on the wall, and then any of the green colors that were being shown through the glass by the trees. I then used a generative fill layer to get rid of the switch, and the reason I used generative fill was because for some reason the AI removal tool wasn't working quite as well as I had hoped. But anyway, combine that to another layer again, which apparently is a step that many people get irritated by, but I do not care. That's just my workflow. I then did my process for adding a subtle amount of sharpening, and I say subtle because I don't want to go too heavy-handed on this, but the key to this process is making sure that the sharpening appears only in the darker areas. If you want to know the full technique of how I did this, make sure to check out the video. I'll link to it in the description concerning sharpening. It's a real quick, fairly simple, easy technique to just add that subtle amount to it. Just give it kind of that tack sharp look. The next step was to add a curves adjustment layer where I just kind of add some adjustments, brighten up the midtones a bit, bring down the shadows a tad, just to add a little bit more dramatic punch to it, but not go too crazy with it. That's with before and after. Merge it to its own layer, and that is about it. Well guys, that will do it for this video. If you are not subscribed to the channel yet and you enjoy these kind of videos, make sure to do so, because I still have 3 videos that I'll be posting soon where there'll be tutorials related to shooting and editing to this property. Feel free to follow me on Instagram at matthewaphoto. If you made it all the way here to the end, I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to watch. That'll do it for this video. We will see you on the next one.